today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about
identifying your emotional triggers and how they sabotage your divorce process. Triggers are what sabotage everybody everywhere. We want to identify our triggers and see the pattern and connect it to the past. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship, and today we're talking about sabotaging your divorce process, identifying your emotional triggers, and if we're honest, this could be for anyone. So if you're not getting divorced and you've bumbled on this by accident, stick around because triggers are what sabotage everybody everywhere, except maybe the Dalai Lama. I don't know. Haven't met him. And let's face it, everything we see of the Dalai Lama is produced and canned. I wonder what he's like in person in his real life. What does the Dalai Lama get upset about, if anything? But that's not what we're here to talk about. That's a whole nother Rich in Relationship. In the last episode of Rich in Relationship on this topic, we talked all about self-mastery in divorce, what it means to get a handle on yourself so that you don't feel like you're stepping in it in the divorce process and screwing up the work that your attorneys are doing or triggering the person on the other side who 9 times out of 10 you're stuck with because you have children with. What we came up with is that there are these things called triggers and that divorce is a naturally triggering process, that the actual structure of the court system and the divorce process is in itself triggering. In this episode, we're going to talk about what is a trigger. What are these triggers that blow up our best intentions? And you may be familiar with them because if you're getting divorced, the chances are it's these very same triggers that got you into the courthouse. First, what is a trigger? In its simplest form, a trigger is something that is said, something that happens, an occurrence that brings up an emotional reaction that is more than the situation calls for. It's inappropriate to the situation or it's unwarranted in that situation. That seems pretty simple, right? Except what would possibly set us up to have inappropriate or unwarranted emotion? And that's really the question. What is the makeup of a trigger? We talked a little bit about it in the last episode, and today we're going to do the deep dive. What we mentioned in the last episode is that triggers are unresolved emotion from our past, situations that, for one reason or another, we have not been able to let go of them. Triggers are not just the result of one incident, though they can be. For example, in the case of trauma, like PTSD, for example, we might have one incident that's so intense that it brings up an emotional reaction. People with PTSD, and typically we think of people who are coming back from war, when we think of this, have seen something so horrendous or done something so horrendous, sometimes at the command of their superior officers, sometimes just situational rage, that anything that reminds them of that brings up inappropriate or unwarranted emotion. People with PTSD can be triggered by the sound of a car backfiring. They can be triggered by the sound of a child crying. They can be triggered by anything that brings up that incomplete experience. And what makes that experience incomplete is that the situation was so intense that it has been repressed. It's been repressed and sublimated. And what happens to people who have trauma on this level is that something triggers a response. And very often it's not as if they recall the event itself. They get little flashbacks of the event that bring up the emotion. I had a client who, in the stress of war, had killed a child. And consequently, every time they heard a child crying, it brought up the unresolved emotion of that experience. And it wasn't like they heard a child crying and they said, oh my God, I killed a child. They heard a child crying and it brought up the intensity of the emotion in that moment that had not been resolved, that was still sitting with them. Because the truth is that our unconscious mind, which sublimates experiences like this that we don't feel we're ready to process, wants us to heal. The unconscious mind, which stores the emotion, also wants to resolve it. And in the case of PTSD, the only way that the emotion can be allowed to be expressed is in little drips and drabs, not the whole scene, because the whole scene is so intense and so vivid and so painful that my client couldn't feel that he could bear it. And so his unconscious mind would only let little bits of it that would suddenly overwhelm him. And so imagine that you're going through your day-to-day life and something pretty commonplace happens, a sound or an incident that triggers a very intense emotional experience, and you don't even know what it is. It's terrifying to you. You're feeling terror. You're feeling anger. You're feeling confusion. You're like, how is this happening here now? That's a trauma-driven response. Now, most of us don't have trauma on that level, but unresolved emotion on any level is a form of trauma, I'm going to call it. Trauma is an extreme word. Let's put it on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 would be an intensely traumatic experience, being beaten as a child, being sexually abused, being in a wartime situation. That might be a 10. And so that's going to bring up flashes of intense emotion that are disassociated with the actual experience. That's a 10. And then on a 1, you're at peace with yourself. Well, triggers are somewhere between 1 and 10. For most of us, triggers are 5, 6, 7, 8 in that realm. Anything below a 5 might be unwarranted or inappropriate, but manageable. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, those are going to be levels of emotional response that they're so intense that we feel like they have us. It's like this feeling comes up and we ride it like we're surfing on a wave. Or maybe we're not surfing. We're being tumbled and spun in a wave that's so powerful we don't feel that we can control it or manage it. The stored emotion is so great. Now, for those of us who have not had a single defining moment, we probably have a series of experiences that have built the same unresolved emotion collectively. Then the way this works is the unconscious mind categorizes things by emotional quality. It categorizes things sequentially, time-wise. It categorizes things by emotional quality. It categorizes experiences by the kinds of experiences. So what the unconscious mind starts doing is it starts collecting groups of experiences. Let me give you something that you can relate to that'll help you. Maybe when you've been driving or walking, something happens, somebody jostles you, or maybe you're driving, somebody cuts you off, does something that feels a little unsafe to you, and you look at them, and you automatically categorize. Gray-haired old lady, dangerous. They drive unconsciously. They cut me off. And what you start to look out for when you're driving are gray-haired old ladies, because your mind has put together a number of experiences you've had where gray-haired old ladies have cut you off. Gray-haired old ladies have driven too slowly. Gray-haired old ladies haven't gone when the light's green. Gray-haired old ladies have not stopped adequately. You start to accumulate a series of experiences and emotions, fear, around them. And whenever you're driving and you see a gray-haired old lady, you go on unconscious alert. It might not be gray-haired old ladies. It might be angry white men in fast cars. It might be policemen. Maybe you've been pulled over so many times just for being someone that they're looking for, a kind of person that the police are looking for. I'm not even going to spit out a category here. That every time you see policemen, an internal red light goes off and you get very, very scared. It brings up an intensity of emotion that most other people don't experience when they see policemen or when they see white men in fast cars or when they see little old ladies. All right. You've created a collection of judgments and emotions around a kind of situation that brings up a level of emotion that seeing a little old lady or seeing a white man in a fast car or seeing a police officer in a police car, the level of emotion is higher than the situation calls for. That's basically what a trigger is. Only the level of emotion is going to be a little more. When you see a police officer, you might be, I'm going to be on my best behavior. Or some people see a police officer and think, thank God they're here. They're my friend. Some people have had both. I've had both experiences, by the way. Right? Like they've become my friends. That's because I did some work on releasing the experiences I had around police officers that led me to be afraid and paranoid around them. Now they're my pals. Actually, I have a lot of, this is going to sound really funky. Some of my best friends are police officers, right? Yeah. But it's true, actually, because I'm doing the work, releasing the trigger. So triggers are collections of experiences and emotions that our unconscious mind has put together so that when an experience that is similar to that experience or a situation that is similar to that situation or certain word combinations come together, it brings up inappropriate or unwarranted emotion. Emotion so strong that we have trouble overriding it. It's so intense that our rational mind checks out, maybe momentarily, maybe for a few minutes, maybe for a while. And in the divorce process, that is pretty common. Right? In the divorce process, your former partner sends an offer to you through their lawyer, and you go, oh my God, they want that much money? We don't even have that much money. And your conscious mind forgets that the lawyer is being a negotiator, and the negotiators always ask for more than they really want. And the part of you that's triggered says, that nasty such and such, they want everything I have. They're going to leave me with nothing. And we get very upset. And we have unwarranted and inappropriate emotion. Unwarranted and inappropriate because entering a negotiation triggered is a death sentence for you as the person in the negotiation. Always end up either sabotaging the negotiation or ending up with the short end of the stick or both. And in the divorce process, being triggered, what that means is when we're triggered, it means that we're going to spend more time negotiating. And when we're spending more time negotiating, it's more time paying $200, $300, $400, $500, $600, $700, $800, $900 an hour to one attorney. And when there's two attorneys involved, it means paying twice as much because both people are triggered. Both people are having unwarranted or inappropriate emotion. They're fighting. There's a piece of furniture that is representative of something that they didn't get in their marriage or as something that they know the other person wants. And they're going to get that piece of furniture because they're going to get that person by getting it. Or they're going to get that thing that they didn't get in the marriage by getting it. That's what being triggered means. And the consequences are mad expensive financially, mad expensive for you emotionally, expensive for your children, the very same children that the other person is also a parent of. You're going to get that person. You're going to show them they are the parent of your children. And when you get them and show them, you're not just hurting them, you're hurting your children. But it doesn't matter because you're triggered. You're having inappropriate and unwarranted emotion. Now, if we go down to the brain science, you've probably heard all about this, but I'm going to tell you anyway, for those of you who haven't. There's a part of our brain called the amygdala, which is all about fight, flight, or play dead. It's an unthinking part of our brain. And when we're triggered, our amygdala is triggered means our amygdala has been triggered. It believes that there is perceived danger. Remember when I told you about those police officers? Oh, perceived danger. Anything could happen with them. I'm driving within the boundaries of the law. They're behind me. I'm signaling. I'm being the best little driver that I can, but anything could happen. You're experiencing inappropriate or unwarranted anxiety. Finally, they turn off. Or even worse, you turn left and they turn left also. Oh my God, they've got me for something. They're going to single me out for something. You're having inappropriate and unwarranted emotion. That's your amygdala. Your amygdala is triggered. Your amygdala is afraid. And so it goes to fight, flight, or play dead. So you pull over in anticipation that they're going to pull you over anyway. And they drive by and you go, good thing I escaped that one. But you can't reset right away because your amygdala is kicked in. There's a chemical reaction that comes with the amygdala. There's adrenaline that happens. There's all kinds of hormones and biology that happens when we're triggered. And resetting that sucker takes time, depending on how much you hang out in your amygdala. And when you're getting divorced, right, your amygdala is triggered. And it's triggered. The more your amygdala is triggered, the bigger it gets because it feels needed. You're literally putting energy and attention into that part of your brain, unconsciously putting energy and attention to that part of your brain. More blood is going to it, so it grows. It's like exercising a muscle. It actually grows. And your cerebral cortex, which is the thinking part of your brain, isn't getting the attention that it needs in the divorce process. So guess what happens to it? It actually shrinks. That's right. By allowing yourself to be triggered and not recognizing the process that you're in, you set yourself up to be more triggered and have less recognition. Triggers, unconscious triggers, massively powerful in our lives when we let them be. Now, I've got good news for you. The good news is we don't have to hang out in that triggered experience. That's right. I'm going to say it again. The good news is we can be triggered and not hang out there. In fact, we can be triggered and not lose contact with our cerebral cortex, or maybe not lose contact with it for very long. The first thing that needs to happen is we need to make a decision that we're going to address this. When we're triggered, we're right and they're wrong. When we're triggered, we're afraid, we're hurt, we're sad, we're angry, we're blaming. We need to make a decision that this is maybe not the best place to make decisions from. It might be a great place to make decisions from in a real life-threatening environment. But divorce is not a real life-threatening environment. It feels like it, but it's not. So we need to make a decision that we are not going to allow our triggers to own our lives. And there are things that we can do. A number of things. I mentioned in the last episode that you can treat the symptoms or you can remove them. And I think we ended the episode with imagining what it would be like if you could remove them. Treating the symptoms looks like recognizing when you're triggered. And in the last episode, I gave you an exercise. I said, start writing down for the next week or two until this second episode comes out, all the things that are triggering you. And I suggested that you do it on your phone or on a piece of paper in a notebook, wherever you can store it. All right. And the next thing I want you to do now that you've done that, and if you haven't done that, this is a good exercise for you to do this week. So is take a look at that list, and you're going to notice that there are groupings of things that are triggering you, particular circumstances that are triggering you. In your divorce process, there are going to be really one or maybe two things that are triggering you, possibly three. That's a lot, but really one or two. And when you take a close look at them, if you think about your childhood, you might notice that they remind you of something from your childhood. It might be a time where you didn't get what you wanted. It might be a time where somebody took something that you wanted. It might be that you had a reaction to a specific situation in your childhood that is carrying over into this experience. It could be anything like that. But triggers usually, actually always, have a connection to sometime when we were 0 to 7. There'll often be a connection to something else from when we were 7 to 12. And there'll be another connection, something that happened from when we were 12 to 18. That trigger is going to repeat itself. There are going to be several versions of that experience that we've gathered together, a pattern. So you want to look at the pattern of the trigger and then go, what does that pattern feel like or look like from my past? And if you're saying, oh, there's nothing, then you're probably being a little dishonest, or maybe you need a little help with that. You can always call me if you need a little help. Go to my website, richinrelationship.com, and click on the schedule a call. It's a free call. Let's talk about it. I'll help you figure it out. I'll do it just because it's fun for me to help people figure it out. Won't even charge you for that call. And that may be all you need, by the way. That call may be perfectly adequate for you. But for sure, what you're going to get out of that call is a next step of your choosing, not mine, that works for you. All right, so the first step is we want to identify our triggers and see the pattern and connect it to the past. There are two approaches to this, as we mentioned in the last episode. The first is to learn how to manage the trigger itself. And so we can manage the trigger itself by committing to one or several exercises that are going to help us to reset our brain. Remember, I told you the amygdala is triggered. The amygdala is triggered by several things. The most basic is to blink slowly 3 times, really slowly, really slowly. Close your eyes, hold it closed, 1, 2, 3, open it. Close your eyes. 1, 2, 3, open it. Close your eyes. 1, 2, 3, open it. Right? Part of why that'll help reset your amygdala is if you were really in danger, if you were in the jungle and you saw a tiger, you would never blink 3 times slowly because the tiger would eat you. So what you're telling your brain when you do that is it's safe. Or you might accompany that with a deep breath. Close your eyes, deep breath in, release, open your eyes. Close your eyes, deep breath in, release, open your eyes. And deep breathe, or you might do the deep breathing all on its own. 4 deep breaths in, hold 1, 2, 3. That's called box breathing. Box breathing is, again, a way of changing the chemistry of your body and telling your amygdala it's safe. The box breathing with the slow blinking, holding your eyes closed and opening them is like a double whammy. Another thing you might do is you might, if you're in a situation with other people and you feel silly doing deep breathing, box breathing, or blinking your eyes slowly with them, is you might say to them, I need to go to the bathroom. I will be right back. And go into a stall. You don't even have to sit down and do your deep breathing or blinking or both until you reset. Other things that you can do that will help reset your amygdala are prayer and meditation. Studies of brain scans of people who are meditating indicates that the energy, the electrical energy that's in the brain moves from the amygdala to the cerebral cortex when people meditate or pray or practice mindfulness. And further, studies indicate that when people do this at least 4 times a day for 20 minutes a day, or daily for, let's say, 10 minutes a day, something like that, the amygdala shrinks and the cerebral cortex grows. Over time, your triggered reaction will become less and shorter simply by merit of the fact that you've been putting more attention into your cerebral cortex through meditation and prayer. Now, these are ways of managing the trigger reaction itself and highly advisable. Great starting point. But what about the collection of emotions and the assumption or belief that is sitting on those emotions? Like the Vietnam vet who's got PTSD, or someone who's had an experience of little old ladies. What about those things? Surely there has to be a way to release that. Our unconscious mind, after all, wants to release it. That's why it is bringing the unwarranted or inappropriate reaction to the surface so that we can see that there is something it wants us to release. It's not bringing it up to sabotage our life. Our experience that it is sabotaging our life. Our conscious mind is saying, I'm entering this negotiation and I'm going to get the best deal I can. We have an inappropriate or unwarranted reaction to something they say or do, or it's something in the situation that triggers us, and it blows up our negotiating strategy and we walk away with less than we want. We go, sabotage myself. I shot myself in the foot. Why do I do that? But it's not really sabotage. What it really is our unconscious mind desperately trying to get our conscious mind's attention so we can heal it. Well, there's a process called mental and emotional release that is hugely transformational when it comes to triggers. And again, if you want to know more about mental and emotional release, highly effective. Reach out to me through the website. Happy to talk to you about it. Or read Mental and Emotional Release by Dr. Matt James, or do both. I have all of my clients who do mental and emotional release read that book, or at least the first 60 pages, so that they understand how the unconscious mind works and they understand that it is a good thing. The unconscious mind is our friend. It's an ally. It wants the best for us. The beauty of releasing the trigger is it stops coming up. You stop having that reaction. The unconscious mind has healed itself. And as I said in the end of the last episode, imagine what that would be like. How liberating it could be, right? On the one hand, we've got tools for managing when we feel triggered so that we're not exploding situations unconsciously. And I highly recommend that you develop and utilize those tools, because as you utilize the tools, you won't have that experience of self-sabotage. You will have an experience of unwarranted emotion, but you won't be acting on it. In 12-step programs, they have a saying, I'm not responsible for the first thought, but I'm responsible for the second thought. And what that translates into is, if my first thought is unwarranted or inappropriate emotion, I don't have control over that directly. It's coming from an unconscious place. My conscious mind can't control my unconscious mind as hard as I try. It can help it reset itself, but it can't control it. But my conscious mind can step in and say, that's unwarranted and inappropriate. Let's reset. So that what comes out of our mouth isn't necessarily what we're experiencing. So those practices that I talked about, deep breathing, blinking, meditation, mindfulness, prayer, these are all ways to manage those triggers. The serenity prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, my own reaction, courage to change. Also, actually, totally inappropriate. Let's start that over. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the circumstances outside of me, possibly the feeling that I'm having in the moment. Courage to change the things I can, how I express what's coming up for me, and how I allow my unconscious mind or don't allow my unconscious mind to heal that in the future, and the wisdom to know the difference. Right? Wisdom would be cerebral cortex. The serenity prayer, why does that work? Because it actually requires our cerebral cortex to engage in prayer. Remember that prayer and meditation take us to our cerebral cortex. So anytime we feel inappropriate or unwarranted emotion, if we stop and say a simple prayer like that, whether you believe in God or not, it could just be, grant me the serenity. We might be talking to our own unconscious mind, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom of the difference. It requires our conscious mind to run through that prayer. We might do that 30, 40 times as a reset process so that what comes out of our mouth is appropriate and warranted. And then when we have enough of those experiences, we can go and see that there's a pattern I asked you to identify in the last show, and we can release it. We can work on it. So in summing this up, divorce is an innately triggering experience. It's set up to be triggering. When we're triggered, it's our unconscious mind looking to heal unresolved emotion and beliefs from our past. When we're triggered, we have the choice of resetting and expressing ourselves in a way that's appropriate and warranted for the situation, or giving in, expressing ourselves in a way that's unwarranted or inappropriate. And when we look at the pattern of triggers, we can start to identify what the root cause is, and we can engage in practices like mental and emotional release so that we can let go of those emotions, learn the lesson that we didn't learn. And when we do that, our divorce is going to be faster and less expensive and less painful for us and less painful even for the other parent and for our children. And wouldn't that be awesome? Worked for me in my divorce. So think about it. Next week, we're going to talk more about the unconscious mind. I kind of introduced it to you here. We're going to go do a deep dive on the unconscious mind. What is this unconscious mind that seems to be dropping these bombs in my life? And how do I learn to have a better relationship with it? As always, I'd love to hear from you. What's your experience with what's going on for you? What's working for you here? What isn't? What do you want to hear about that we're not talking about? What are we talking about that you do want to hear about? You can email me, rich@richinrelationship.com. You can comment on the podcast. You can touch me at Rich in Relationship at LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all of these great vehicles for expressing ourselves and communicating. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Rich in Relationship.